Hi and welcome to Writing with Steve, with me Steve Evans. In our last video we looked at a typical narrative structure of call to action, climax and resolution. So if you haven't had time to look at that video, please check it out. In this video we're looking at the viewpoints that 99% of stories mostly use. And then at the end I'm going to give some advice and some guidance on how to choose the best viewpoint for your story. It's really important to consider viewpoint when planning your story. First person voice is the most immediate form of narrative. This is because the reader experiences the story through the point of view of your main character. The reader gets to experience their thoughts and feelings. This establishes a really close connection between your character and the reader. And because stories really need an emotional connection to actually work and succeed, this is a great way of establishing that emotional bond between your reader and your characters. If you choose first person viewpoint, the reader takes the journey with the main character, almost like a companion, and experiences the emotion of the journey, including the triumphs and the setbacks along the way. The drawback of first person point of view is that the reader is getting very little variety because they will be attached to that one character. As a writer, you really need to create a compelling and intriguing main character that your reader can bond with on an emotional level. Also, it has a setback from the climax and resolution point of the story, because the reader will know that, of course, your main character will survive the situation. So for example, if it's a thriller that you're writing or a crime novel, we'll know that finally, if it's being told from your main character's point of view, that your main character is going to be a survivor. However, one advantage is that if you begin your story where your character is in a position, has reached a certain position, so if it's a rags to riches story and they are already rich and powerful, or if they have been in a terrible situation but your story starts with them as being the survivor, the emotional journey will be that your reader wants to know how they got into that position, how they survived that awful situation, how they were able to overcome the obstacles of that journey. So of course you are still creating that emotional bond with the reader. By contrast, the third person viewpoint is where you are almost, as a writer, taking the godlike position and you are describing the world. You are absolutely describing all the characters and the action from a what we call an omniscient point of view. As a omniscient narrator, you have the power to comment on the thoughts and feelings of every character and describe every character in that story. It's not from any particular character's point of view, including the main characters. And this style of writing was very popular in the 19th century and the early 20th century. So for example, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, many of the Charles Dickens' novels too. The omniscient narrator fell out of style for a while. However, it was, of course, the main way of telling a story through film and also in plays, drama too. Of course, there are many popular stories and novels that are written from a point of view of an omniscient narrator. For example, the best-selling Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. So for you as a writer, it gives you lots of possibilities of what to write. By writing in the third person point of view, it allows you to introduce more than one protagonist, in fact multiple protagonists. So it allows you to create not one storyline but several storylines, some running parallel and some interweaving along the way. So it lends itself really well to epic stories, stories told on a large canvas. For example, Lord of the Rings, we can follow the journeys of several characters, particularly when the members of the Fellowship all go on their separate journeys. We are then taken chapter by chapter to the experiences of different characters. Likewise with George Martin's Game of Thrones. Another advantage is that you are going to maintain the interest of your readers, who may find one particular storyline dull and boring, but are really intrigued and excited to follow the other two storylines. So that's going to retain their interest. Another advantage is by providing several storylines, you're able to create story arcs of various lengths and sizes, and we'll be looking at providing story arcs in a future video. Third person viewpoint allows variety in your story, and it's something that you are going to be familiar with by looking at TV series. So TV series where you have multiple protagonists, multiple antagonists as well, adds to a richer, more sophisticated level of storytelling. So for example, think of Boardwalk Empire, Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, The Wire, and you can see the advantages of a third person viewpoint. Third person viewpoint also gives you opportunities to include information to the reader that your protagonist is unaware of. So that gives you opportunities for irony and to ramp up the tension in your stories. Whereas in the first person viewpoint, the reader has to rely on the understanding and judgment of the protagonist, even if that judgment and understanding is incorrect. So you can achieve a multi-layered and multi-dimensional storyline from the first person point of view too. In Dracula, we see several storylines emerge from the points of view of several characters through the device of diary entries, journals, telegrams and memos. This is known as an epistolary novel or story. And by doing this, we are able then to read the thoughts and feelings of specific characters. Using multiple viewpoints again suits a longer story painted on a larger canvas. For example, Dracula spanned countries and cultures. However, be really wary of introducing too many main characters and points of view, because you run the danger of confusing your readers, or you may dilute your characters and not create strong, definable characters for your readers to relate to. So to ensure your readers are not confused, limit the number of character viewpoints. Think about some stories that you're familiar with and look how the writer is using viewpoint to maintain the interest with the reader and maintain that emotional connection. Also note how the writer signals to the reader that this is a particular character speaking. How does the writer set each character apart when they are using multiple protagonists? Think in particular of how they speak or how each reacts to a situation differently. See how they are doing that, what tools the writer uses to make each of their characters' voices distinct. Louis de Bernier's Captain Corelli's Mandolin provides a great example of several different character voices, and we follow these different characters through different chapters of the story, but we can tell precisely which is which because he creates a distinct voice for each. It's also possible to combine the first person viewpoint with the third person viewpoint in what we call limited third person. This is where the writer uses the third person point of view predominantly in the writing, but then we see the point of view of the main character. We can clearly see that the thoughts and feelings being expressed are from the point of view of the protagonist. An example of this is Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. His protagonist is Ignatius J. Riley, and although the story is told in the third person view, it's also third person limited because the writer allows the voice of Ignatius Riley to be prominently expressed in the narrative as we follow his thoughts and his feelings. In Captain Corelli's Mandolin, we have a very interesting narrative structure and a very interesting way of seeing the story unfold from several points of view. The author allows us to see events from several perspectives because we see each of several characters view that event, and we follow the story strands of those several characters. However, when necessary, the writer then takes the role of omniscient narrator and places the events that each character is experiencing and provides us with context for that. So in Captain Corelli's Mandolin, each character is experiencing the Second World War from their point of view. However, the writer then steps in and places their experiences, their lived experiences, in the context of the greater political story and narrative of the Second World War, when he introduces the reader to some background about the war, the major leaders of the war, and what was happening to Greece at the time the story is set. However, you may also want to tell the story of one event and tell that story through the experiences of several characters from their point of view. And by seeing the one event through several pairs of eyes, you are then able to relay to the reader a more three-dimensional view of that event, but also It's a great way of showing the inconsistencies of points of view between the characters and how memory can be an imperfect way of telling a story and recording events. In Michael Frayn's play, Copenhagen, the writer tells the story of a weekend from the point of view of 3 characters, and interestingly, each character brings a different perspective on that weekend and the events as they unfold in that weekend, and their accounts are often inconsistent and conflicting. So as a writer, how are you going to decide the best viewpoint? And a lot of it will depend on the type of story you're telling. For example, in the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, the story is told from the point of view of Dr. Watson. By telling it from his point of view, Dr. Watson serves as a guide to the reader. We find out pieces of information at the same time as Watson. Now, if Conan Doyle, the author, had written it from the point of view of Sherlock Holmes, then we would be party to Holmes's thought processes and deductions. And of course, that would spoil the mystery and the suspense. But by moving the viewpoint to that of Dr. Watson, it allows the writer to provide the clues as and when required, and allows the reader the fun and enjoyment of trying to figure out the mystery and solve the mystery themselves. The genre or type of story then may determine the viewpoint you are going to apply to the story. In Harper Lee's story To Kill a Mockingbird, we see the story unfold from the point of view of a young girl, Scout. At the start of the story, Scout is 6 years of age. By its conclusion, she's 8 years of age. And by allowing the story to be told from her point of view, it demonstrates the naivety and innocence of the child in viewing racial prejudice in the southern states. It also allows the writer to demonstrate the protagonist's journey from one of innocence to one of revelation, to gain insight by the end of the novel on issues of prejudice, cruelty, and inhumanity. Telling the story through the eyes of a child also allows us to assess the story from an adult point of view and makes us examine our own prejudices and allows us to make comparisons between then and now. So first consideration of point of view is the genre of the story you've chosen to write and the bigger ideas behind it. The second consideration, and as important, is the emotional pull of your story. What point of view will give the most emotional impact in your story? What will create the most emotional connection between your character and the reader? What's going to pull them along throughout that story all the way to the very end? So genre, idea, and emotional pull. They are the 3 key factors to consider when choosing your point of view. So it's very much over to you. So when beginning your story, ask what point of view is going to give your story the most emotional impact, and make that immediate connection with your reader. Think of stories you've read that have connected with you in a big way. How did the writer achieve this? What did he or she place in that story that made that connection, and from whose point of view is the story told? And then that should give you a real indicator of where you can take your own writing and your own story. I hope you like this video. If so, please hit the like button, hit the bell, and please subscribe. Also, I'd be really interested to hear what factors influenced your choice of point of view in your story. And if you have any suggestions for the content you'd like us to include in future videos, please leave them below. This is the 4th video in a series on how to write a story, how to write a novel. If you haven't seen our earlier videos, please check them out. Until next time, write well.